but the Premier has sort of bulldozed through that. It could also be some version of the negative question that the separatists tried to get put on the ballot and had the courts kick back. I think one thing is clear. This is not going to be the end of this conversation. This is sort of the end of the beginning. I think we are going to be talking about separation, unfortunately, for a while to come here in Alberta.
So the Alberta courts quashed a separatist petition just last week. Now, you went through some of them, but remind us, what options does that leave Smith?
Well, in theory, it leaves her the option of calling the question herself. Understandably, she probably doesn't want to do that because it is a very unpopular proposition among the general public. I think in more normal times, she would simply leave this be, let the courts, put it to rest. But her party is run and very heavily populated by Alberta separatists, and they have made it very clear that if they do not get some sort of question on Alberta independence in the near future, they're going to do to her what they did to Jason Kenney, which is remove her as the leader of the province and their party. So she has to find a way to give the separatists what they want without appearing to side with them. A lot of people, including myself, have more or less concluded that she is, for all intents and purposes, a separatist, even if she pretends otherwise. But she hasn't come out and said that yet, and I don't think that would be wise for her to do so. So she's going to try to split the middle here somehow on having a question without appearing to take their side.
When you describe her as a separatist, is that because she's allowing the separatists within her party to kind of dictate policy, or do you genuinely believe that she herself would like to see Alberta be independent?
I'm less interested in her sort of personal views because as the Premier of the province, what matters is what she does. And what she's been doing for the last 18 months at least is making life as easy as possible for the Alberta separatist movement to get a toehold in our discourse and to get their question on the ballot. And, there's been any number of warnings about the risks this poses in terms of national security, in terms of economic damage to the province. She's had a bunch of off-ramps where she could have, put this thing to rest, most recently the court case that you referenced. And every single time she gets a chance to step away from this, she steps on the gas instead. So, whether or not she is personally a separatist, to me, is less interesting than the way she has governed. And she has governed, for all intents and purposes, like a separatist.
Max, just to let you know and let our audience know, we are waiting for the beginning of the release of that video, which should be very soon, 90 seconds or so. But I understand the feed is not up yet. I may have to interrupt you as we go through this. How much separatist sentiment is there in Alberta?
It hasn't grown that much in spite of all of her many efforts to make it easy for the separatists. It's in the low 20s, mid 20s, somewhere like that. The danger is that there is also a percentage, call it 15 to 25%, that wants to send Ottawa a message. They're frustrated. They feel like they haven't been treated fairly. That's a whole other subject, but we can't get into that now. And so, there is a window, or there's a segment of the population that would vote for some version of a question that sounds separatist. And that's the danger, is that it's not the 25% hardcore separatists. It's the other 25% joining them to send a message to Ottawa, and that message potentially backfiring not just on the entire country, but on Alberta as well.
I think I've heard from some people in Alberta that, boy, Quebec manages to get what it wants because it dangles the possibility of separatism. Alberta needs to do that too. And so appearing to support separatism might be to Alberta's strategic advantage. Do you hear people expressing that sentiment as well?
All the time. And this is the knife to the throat strategy. The part they never talk about is the fact that Quebec's dalliance with separatism has cost it dearly in terms of jobs, investment, being able to attract talent. It has made Quebec the province that depends as heavily on equalization as it does, which is, of course, a big complaint of the separatists. We don't seem to be able to connect those dots in some circles here in Alberta, that, taking this very risky sort of threatening posture doesn't just offer benefits, it also offers drawbacks. And I think we're about to find out the hard way what those drawbacks look like.
Okay, we are live here on CBC News Network. Max, you're doing a great job. We are working on getting the feed up from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Again, reminding our audience we'll take it as soon as we get it. And reminding you, Max, I may have to interrupt you if you're in the middle of an answer. But let me ask you this. The bigger well, I don't know if it's the bigger picture, but I guess another picture is the political fortunes of the UCP, of Premier Danielle Smith's party, and the upcoming election. How are they doing?
Surprisingly well for the extent to which they appear to be trying to tear at the fabric of this country. Almost all the polls are showing that they would win a majority government if we went to an election anytime soon. This does not appear to be harming their fortunes in the province, and I kind of think that reflects back on the opposition here, the NDP, and the way they've handled things. But the risk for the UCP is less the NDP right now than it is their own party splitting in two.
Okay, you know what, Max? I'm going to be rude and interrupt you. Thank you very much for your analysis. We now have the feed, and we are going to go to that. Here's Danielle Smith.
In this province on the future of Alberta and Canada. Last week, an Alberta judge released a decision finding that the citizen initiative petition organized by the group Stay Free Alberta on the issue of Alberta separation is unconstitutional because, in the judge's view, there was not adequate consultation done with the First Nations band about the potential effect of the petition on their treaty rights. This ruling fundamentally misinterprets the nature of the duty to consult, which was never meant to prevent citizens from making their voices heard through a democratic process. Now, I want to be clear. I support Alberta remaining in Canada. That is how I would vote on separation in a provincial referendum. It is also the position of my government and my caucus. However, despite my personal support for remaining in Canada, I am deeply troubled by an erroneous court decision that interferes with the democratic rights of hundreds of thousands of Albertans. Albertans who volunteered, prepared petitions, made their case to fellow citizens, and appear to have secured the required amount of signatures necessary under Alberta law to hold a provincial referendum. The fact is that between the Forever Canada petition requesting a referendum on Alberta remaining in Canada and the Stay Free Alberta petition requesting a referendum on leaving Canada, approximately 700,000 Albertans have signed a petition requesting a vote on this issue. And I, as Premier, will not have a legal mistake by a single judge silence the voices of hundreds of thousands of Albertans. That's not the Alberta way. Alberta's future will be decided by Albertans, not the courts. Our government will therefore be appealing the decision to Alberta's Court of Appeal and, if necessary, the Supreme Court of Canada. But this process will take many months and possibly years before being addressed by those higher courts. In the meantime, under our legal system, this troubling court decision is binding law in Alberta until it is successfully appealed. This means that it is unlikely the courts will permit Elections Alberta to hold a binding provincial referendum on separation until this incorrect ruling is overturned or clarified. But there is another way to hear from Albertans while we wait for our legal appeal to be heard. That is why I'm announcing today that I will be requesting our government add an additional question to the October 19th referendum vote announced previously. The additional question will be, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada? Because this proposed referendum question does not directly trigger separation, but if successful, would ask Alberta's government to commence the legal process necessary to hold a binding referendum on the matter, the recent court ruling would not be applicable, and the referendum question I outlined could proceed. This question will also ensure the 700,000 signatories to both the Forever Canada petition and the Stay Free Alberta petition are respected, and the will of Albertans is heard. Kicking the can down the road only prolongs a very emotional and important debate, and muzzling the voices of hundreds of thousands of Albertans wanting to be heard is unjustifiable in a free and democratic society. It's time to have a vote, understand the will of Albertans on this subject, and move on. Now, obviously, Alberta's first ever provincial vote on our province's future in Canada is of monumental importance. As such, I feel it is important to clearly state my personal position so Albertans know where I stand. I first want to assure Albertans that our government will respect the outcome and direction received on all of the referendum questions being voted on this October 19th. Our government has already launched the website, albertareferendum2026.ca, with a significant amount of background information on the immigration and constitutional questions previously announced, and I hope every Albertan will take the time to explore that website in detail. As to the specific issue of separation, I have repeatedly stated that the position of the UCP caucus and UCP government is to build a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. I have never deviated from that position, and I will not do so now. I will therefore be voting for Alberta to remain in Canada, while continuing to work each and every day to restore and strengthen provincial rights under the Canadian Constitution. The fact is, Canada was founded on this very principle. Canada is very different from the United States and many other Western democracies. For example, the United States centralizes the majority of power and decision-making in its federal government. In Canada, we chose a decentralized federation composed of very unique and diverse provinces left to govern themselves in almost all matters, with the main exceptions of national defense and international affairs. Over time, our federal government has sought to move towards a more centralized American-style system, with Ottawa attempting to take over many provincial areas of jurisdiction, using all manner of legislative, judicial, and financial leverage. I categorically reject Ottawa's attempts to do so, and call on all provincial leaders and MPs to undo the extensive damage that centralization of power in Ottawa has done to our country economically and with respect to national unity. I am fiercely loyal to both Alberta and Canada, but I truly believe our country is so much stronger and more prosperous when we respect the rights of provinces and empower them to govern themselves with minimal federal interference. Albertans, not Ottawa. Quebecers, not Ottawa. And all the other provinces must each be empowered to control our own direction and destiny, whether it's energy policy, agricultural practices, policing, firearms ownership, or how to administer our social programs. The days of Ottawa dictating and interfering in provincial affairs must come to an end. The future economic success and unity of our country depends on it. When I was first elected Premier, I was very concerned that it would be almost impossible to restore provincial rights stolen from Alberta and other provinces by the Trudeau-Singh government in Ottawa. However, our government went to work anyway to see if we could. We have been relentless in making our voices heard, launching dozens of legal actions, appearing in hundreds of national interviews, bridge building with other premiers, and aggressively passing legislation, such as the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, to take back our provincial autonomy from the federal government. We ran extensive advertising campaigns against the destructive net zero electricity regulations, as well as the catastrophic oil and gas production cap, in order to persuade our fellow Canadians that Trudeau's anti-Alberta agenda was also anti-Canadian and was destroying the unity, energy, and economic future of our nation. A great majority of Albertans joined us in that fight, calling friends, relatives, and participating in social media to spread that message throughout the country. We made a lot of noise as a province. We fought hard and refused to accept the status quo. And the result? Well, my friends, we have started to win. Over the course of the last 2 years, the tide of national public opinion on resource development, provincial rights, energy policy, and a host of other issues began to turn. Our Alberta oil sands went from a national target to a national treasure. Pipelines went from impossible to a national imperative. Justin Trudeau's anti-Alberta, anti-energy policies became a national embarrassment, one of several, that ultimately cost him his prime ministership. The Leave It in the Ground NDP, led by Jagmeet Singh, was electorally annihilated. And the federal Liberals, led by their new leader, Prime Minister Mark Carney, adopted most of Alberta's positions on energy and resource development. In fact, the current Prime Minister has worked very constructively with our government to craft an Alberta-Ottawa Energy Agreement, or MOU, as it is often called. This has already attracted tens of billions of dollars in investment for new pipelines, natural gas-run data centers, electricity generation, and so much more. Under that energy agreement with Ottawa, the destructive federal electricity regulations are gone. The economically disastrous oil and gas production cap has been scrapped. New pipelines carrying nearly 1 million barrels of Alberta oil to the United States are proceeding with speed toward construction. And a new 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the BC West Coast is well in progress and on track to have its permitting completed by September of next year. Could and should these reforms and projects move faster? Yes, of course they should. The federal government can and needs to act with even more urgency than it has. Do we in Alberta still have our differences with the federal Liberal government? Obviously. And make no mistake, we will relentlessly challenge them to respect our provincial rights and jurisdiction every time they step over the line. But my fellow Albertans, there can be no doubt that things are a world of difference better for our province than they were under the Trudeau NDP government. Both major federal parties, the federal Conservatives and now the federal Liberals, representing 85% of voters in Canada, are advocating for Alberta to increase our energy production and exports. Only some extremists in the NDP, Bloc Québécois, and Green parties, representing less than 15% of voters in Canada, hold fast to their anti-Alberta, leave-it-in-the-ground rhetoric. This complete turning of Canadian government policy and national public opinion was unthinkable just a few short years ago. No one thought it was possible, except here in Alberta. We turned the tide. We are winning hearts and minds to our cause right across the country, as many of our fellow Canadians are coming to understand that a strong Alberta and strong provinces means a stronger and more prosperous Canada. Now, to those hundreds of thousands of Albertans who are still not convinced or are unsatisfied with the pace of change and believe that separation is the answer, I want you to know that I empathize with you and I understand why you feel that way. You are justifiably frustrated and angry with Ottawa. You are proud and loyal Albertans that have watched our province be taken advantage of repeatedly over past decades, and you want it to stop. So do I, more than anything. Like you, I love this province and our people so much. I am so proud to be Albertan. But I ask you to please consider joining me to vote for Alberta to remain in Canada and not give up on our beautiful country just as we're gaining respect and the tide has turned in our favor. Not when our fellow Canadians, even those that may support different political parties, are nonetheless supporting Alberta's vision for a prosperous, energy-rich nation with strong provinces building a Canada we can be proud of again. In my view, now is not the time to give up hope in our country, not when we have fought so hard for so long and come so far. I believe Canada can still work. I believe it's working better every day, and it can work even better in the future if we keep fighting together for it. Together with our fellow Canadians, we have built a Canada that is loved and respected all over the world. Our men and women have died together fighting for our freedoms and the safety of hundreds of millions around the globe. Canadians were there in Europe, fighting and making the ultimate sacrifice in the Second World War long before we were joined in that effort by our American allies. Together with our allies, we were also instrumental in beating back the forces of communism and terrorism. The world would be a much darker place if not for Canada. We have built marvels of technology together. We are known the world over as a country of innovators, explorers, and entrepreneurs, but also of peacemakers, philanthropists, and contributors to the good of the world. Our federal politicians may stray from our foundational values from time to time, but our fellow Canadians, they are our family, our friends, our blood. We all know our family needs to do some work to get rid of a few bad habits developed over the past decade, but that's what we are in the process of fixing. Now is the time to double down and fight even harder for the prosperity and change we want to see in our country. Because Albertans are at our best. We are hard at work.
All right, that is a video that was produced by the government of Alberta, the Premier Danielle Smith, with a very partisan message. We carried it for you in its entirety because of the importance of the Alberta separatism issue, which she spoke to, but the time that it was released just in the last 15 minutes of our program doesn't leave us any time now for analysis. But of course, The National, which is next here on CBC News Network, will be covering this, and they will be giving analysis to it. So will the other platforms on CBC Radio and digital. And so we will have more on this, I'm sure, tomorrow as well. And by the way, Cross Country Checkup in the first hour on Sunday, we'll be talking about separatism in Alberta. Thank you very much for watching. This program is back, 4 p.m. Pacific, 70.
Tonight, a flight bound for the U.S. diverted to Canada, the direct result of an American travel ban tied to Ebola.
Suddenly all the flight attendants had face masks on, and they won't give you a reason.
An exploding case count abroad drives fear and policy changes, but are border restrictions necessary? A new review by the government that could curb the right to strike.
They've basically opened up the entire Canada Labour Code.
Unions shun the notion while others say it's just good business. And he defended the U.S. Capitol. His question now, why?
What did we do it for? What was that sacrifice for?
New backlash to a fund that could compensate January 6th rioters.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Tensions are rising, as are the number of suspected deaths from the Ebola outbreak centered in Congo. The U.S. is restricting some travel from the region, and that forced one flight heading south of this border to land in Canada instead. Montreal's airport suddenly caught up in it all when U.S. authorities barred a passenger on board that plane from entering. The unfolding crisis also sparking new clashes in Congo between local customs and the race to stop the virus. One treatment center was burned by loved ones upset they could not retrieve a body. There is a global scramble now to contain the spread of the virus. She and Desjardins with what we know happened to the passenger forced to disembark in Canada.
An international flight bound for Detroit diverted to Montreal, to one of Canada's busiest airports, on board a citizen of Congo, where a deadly Ebola outbreak is worsening rapidly.
Suddenly, all the flight attendants had face masks on. So that was also very concerning when, they suddenly tell us that we are being diverted and they won't give you a reason.
New U.S. rules bar entry to non-U.S. passport holders who have been to Congo, Uganda, or South Sudan in the past 21 days. The U.S. Secretary of State defending that decision.
Our number one priority will always be making sure it doesn't come to the United States. That's our number one obligation.
Health officials say the passenger was assessed, found to be asymptomatic, and flew back to Paris. An Ontario resident, however, is being tested after traveling to East Africa.
What we know is that border closures don't really work.
Canada has not introduced travel restrictions, but this outbreak comes at the start of a busy travel season. Still, experts stress the risk of Ebola transmission here is low.
It's not 0%. The longer this goes on for and the larger the outbreak gets, then the higher the probability is that someone's going to travel with this infection.
But if that happens...
Is there going to be like a widespread outbreak of this in Canada? No, of course not. No, we're not going to have that.
This doctor, who worked with Ebola patients in 2014, says there are protocols countries can put in place.
I think Canada should screen people who are arriving from affected regions to see if they have symptoms, to see if they were exposed in any way.
The World Health Organization is still calling this a public health emergency of international concern. Canada's list of travel advisories is changing as the outbreak develops. Chien Deschardins, CBC News, Toronto.
In communities right at the heart of this devastating crisis, intense grief is mixing with frustration as the desire of some to bury those they've lost collides with rules meant to prevent more death. Lauren Pelly shows us what it looks like when that boils over.
Charred tents are all that's left of this Ebola treatment center in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the result of a clash between authorities trying to stamp out the outbreak and the loved ones of someone who died, who wanted to take the body home for a funeral. Police say a young local didn't grasp the reality of this disease, while authorities were clear all bodies must be cremated to prevent more transmission. Suspected deaths have now hit more than 160, with the vast majority in Congo and at least one in nearby Uganda. Possible cases have soared to at least 600. Officials warn the real numbers could be far higher, and it could be months before there's a usable vaccine for the outbreak's relatively rare strain. Africa's climate poses another roadblock.
Maybe in a hot and humid environment, you're able to stay and care for patients for half hour, 45 minutes at a time before you get too hot, dehydrated yourself, and people will have to leave.
This Toronto physician worked in West Africa during a massive Ebola outbreak in 2014. He says getting healthcare teams better protective equipment with built-in fans could help them reach more patients, but
it's really a race against time.
This Winnipeg microbiologist fears containing this outbreak won't be easy. After his own experience tackling Ebola in Liberia, he warns getting workers and supplies into remote areas can require days-long journeys.
The unfortunate reality is that, we're not looking at, a few weeks.